Welcome to another episode of The Dissection. The topic today is this fundamental question in South African politics. Can the African National Congress bounce back? Now, we have to be pragmatic. We have to be realistic. In order for any political party to grow and to capture a critical mass and continue to grow and capture that critical mass, it must be able to persuade and show the public that it can address the main challenges facing the people. In South Africa, those challenges happen to be poverty and unemployment, crime and inequality. Those are the main ones. So if you're going to deal with the challenges facing South Africa, you have to be able to show that you can deal with those, as well as the historical challenges, legacies, sentiments which continue to prevail in South Africa. Issues of structural racism, issues of interpersonal racism, issues of patriarchy, misogyny, and a variety of other social and cultural issues. You have to show that you have resonance on those particular issues. The ANC has tried to make the argument, particularly recently, that it is now back to being committed to the National Democratic Revolution. This is the communication that was provided by President Cyril Ramaphosa when he was speaking at the January 8th celebrations. He spoke a lot about the NDR, but there's a question around that must be asked. And the question is formulated thus: can a billionaire and a private sector champion implement the NDR? In Stellenbosch, the NDR and the other phrase that is used for it, the radical economic transformation, are swear words. Stellenbosch, as you know, is home to 30 or so billionaires in South Africa and is the heart of Mzansi's chaebols, or if you will, oligarchs. Now the question then can be reformulated. Does a billionaire private sector champion whose presidential projects office has received donations and or pledges of up to 500 million rands from the top CEOs in South Africa have a genuine commitment to the National Democratic Revolution? I'll give my view on that and the fundamental question of can the ANC bounce back as we have this conversation. This is The Dissection. So let's start with this particular breakdown of what are the economic challenges the country is facing. When you are the governing party, your prospects are determined by the performance of the economy. Part of the reason why Donald Trump won is because Americans simply felt that they had more money under his administration. Bill Clinton in 1992 had that famous campaign which said, "It's the economy, stupid," right? He was basically trying to say George Bush didn't get it because he didn't get the economic challenges that the people were facing. It's the economy, stupid. In South Africa, there are some long-standing and worsening economic problems. If you look at long-term unemployment, which is employment for 1 year or longer, that has gone up year on year from 2014. Look at this data. From 2014 up until 2024, you can see that the line is going upwards consistently. If you look at unemployment on the expanded definition, 42% of South Africans are unemployed on the expanded definition of employment based on the last quarter's results. If you look at the youth unemployment figure, that is very high at 70%. If you look at that 25 to 35 age group, unemployment is very high there as well at 50%. Both of these are on the expanded definition, which includes people who are no longer actively looking for work because they are discouraged. But a discouraged job seeker and an encouraged job seeker who are both unemployed are both unemployed. You know, sometimes statistics can hide the reality of things by glossing over certain realities, by looking at particular metrics and not looking at others. So when you think about unemployment, you always have to think about it on the expanded definition. You look at the GDP growth rate, the gross domestic product growth rate, it's stuck just under 1%, right? Most of last year, it was about 0.4% growth quarter on quarter. And the last quarter actually saw a shrinking, right, of 0.3 of the GDP growth rate. So the GDP is not growing. It's not growing fast enough. It's supposed to, according to the National Development Plan, grow at 5% and even more in order for South Africa to achieve its economic objectives. We just saw reports now that the steelmaker ArcelorMittal will be closing, and this will lead up to 100,000 job losses just early this year. Early news announcements. The crime rate is still one of the highest crime rates in the world. You think about poverty, because remember we spoke about how unemployment and poverty, they do go together. The 2015 data showed that about 50% of the population were living under the national upper bound poverty line, while 25%, almost 14 million people, were experiencing food poverty, right? And that number had gone up from the 2011 numbers. Then you fast forward to the 2023 numbers, the number of people living in poverty was 62.6%, right? If you think about that, South Africa went from almost half of the population living in poverty to 2/3 of the population living below the poverty line in 2023. And this is in a period of about 10 years. So the economic data is not favorable. The poverty data is not favorable. You add to the fact that the last data that we look at is 2023, but since 2023, the cost of living has gone up. Food inflation has been higher than overall inflation. So it's very probable right now that there are over 65% of people living in poverty. And that creates a very, very dark economic set of conditions. The economic weather is not favorable to the ANC growing. Right? The economic challenges clearly create an uphill comrades marathon for the ANC, but the party is also facing internal challenges, and we have to talk about those internal challenges. The first one that I think is important to point out is that as things stand right now, the ANC doesn't have a superstar to take over. They don't have a superstar who is waiting in the trenches, ready to take over, and that creates a leadership vacuum, that creates a succession vacuum, if you will, and that creates room for a massive, massive factional battle. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But let's just look at the loss of support for the ANC over the years, right? Let's just think about what the ANC has been going through since 1999. 1999, they had 266 seats, and they had a percentage of 66.4%, right? Not bad. 2004, this was their best year, where they had 279 seats, 69.7% of the votes. So that was the peak of ANC under Mbeki. Basically 70% of South Africans voted for the ANC. The ones who turned out to vote amongst the registered voters. 2009, under Zuma, that went down. They lost some seats. They went to 65.9%, right, of the vote. Still close to 2/3, still a significant number. But in fact, in percentage terms, they may have gone down, but in terms of absolute voters, they went up because 11.6 million South Africans voted for them over the 10.8 million South Africans who had voted in 2004. So more people showed up to vote for Jacob Zuma than actually had showed up to vote for Thabo Mbeki's ANC. 2014, they dropped a little bit to 62.15% or 62%, dropped also in terms of the absolute voters, and that's where they were standing. 2019, the Ramaphosa years, that's where we saw steep drops beginning to come into effect. 2019 dropped from 62% to 57.5%. 2014 dropped from 57.5% to 40%. So under the Ramaphosa years, the ANC has lost 22% of the support it enjoyed, and it has also lost 5 million votes in terms of absolute voters. That's the one side of the equation. On the other side of the equation, you look at voter turnout. Voter turnout has gone down significantly since 1999. It was 89% in 1999. 2004, it dropped to 76%. 2009, it went up a bit to 77%. Then 2014 dropped to 73%. 2019 dropped to 66%. 2024, it dropped to 58.6%. A lot of these voters who are not showing up to vote are from that ANC fold. Some of them have not been attracted by COPE, by EFF, by MK, and they are not attracted to the Democratic Alliance, Freedom Front Plus, and other alternatives. So rather than go for votes for parties that they find to be compromised, they just simply do not vote. This is where the ANC is at. This is where the political environment is at. They're dealing with the fact that they've lost seats, they've lost percentage, they've lost voters, and turnout is suppressed. This is where they are. This is the crisis of where the ANC is. And that gradual decline seems to be continuing. But not only is that happening, when you look at this lower voter turnout issue, it shows you that the public in and of itself is becoming less interested in democracy as a tool for bettering their lives. Low voter turnout shows you that registered voters no longer buy into democracy as a model. Forget the unregistered population, which exists and actually is a significant number, because if you think about the last number of registered voters, about 27 million, but the eligible voters is about 42 million. So when you then think of the fact that about 15 million South Africans have not bothered to register to vote at all, in addition to the fact that those who have registered to vote, close to, because 58, you're basically at 50-50, right? If you're on 58%, 4 out of 10 people didn't bother to vote, considering the fact that they were not impressed by the options that they had. So 4 out of 10 registered don't vote. Then you've got 15 million people who are not registered but eligible to register. That just shows you that the whole idea of democracy is no longer appealing to the people. As the ANC, you have to be worried about that, because people used to believe in democracy so much that almost 90% of all registered voters voted in 89.3%. That's a massive turnout. People were still invested in democracy as a tool. And people fought for democracy. They fought for the right to be able to vote, determine their laws. But as they saw politicians not live up to campaign promises, steal and benefit themselves and benefit all of the slave queens of Sandton and Midrand, they then thought, if this money is going to thick thighs and not to communities, what's the point? What's the point, right? So this is where things are. Then you also have to consider the fact that there is low voter registration in the 20 to 30 age group. Younger generations are plugging out of democracy, of voting, of elections. Think about this. There are 4.2 million registered voters between the ages of 20 to 29 out of the about 11 million people in that age group, right? 4.2. Then there are 6.7 million registered voters between the ages of 30 to 39 out of about 11 million people in that age group. So that shows you that 20 to 29 age group is no longer as invested in democracy as the other age groups, right? So this is where the electoral environment is at broadly for all parties. But if you're the ANC trying to grow, trying to get back to 50, maybe even 60, these are things that should worry you. In addition, the tripartite alliance right now is fragmented. We saw in December last year, the South African Communist Party actually announced that it would contest the 2026 local government elections independently while remaining a member of the tripartite alliance. They are opposed to this coalition between the ANC and the Democratic Alliance. We've seen, and I spoke about how there aren't any mega stars, any superstars. Mbeki, Zuma, Mandela, all of these were mega brands within the ANC, mega brands within the ANC, people who could pull resources, communities, etc. into the fold. Right now, we're in a situation where there are strong brands within the ANC, but they don't have the cachet at the same level, the gravitas at the same level as Mandela, Mbeki, Montlante, or even if you think about Zuma, right? These are big brands. Right now, when President Ramaphosa steps down, who takes over is something that everyone has a little bit of a sour taste in their mouths about. Some people don't like Fikile Mbalula. Ronald Lamula is not as popular within the party and nationally as other figures in the ANC. News 24 has been campaigning consistently against Paul Mashatile, articulating the concerns that many people have on that side of the South African spectrum about him. We've seen the DA complaining about Panyaza Lesufi as well. So what I'm trying to say is whether it's Mbalula, Lamula, Mabuyane, Mashatile, Panyaza, whoever it is, the next crop of ANC leaders are not going to be viewed in the same way as these superstars of the ANC going forward. So that factional contestation is going to make it very difficult for the ANC to really have a prospect of getting to 50, maybe 60% in the next election, unless they have a merger and a deal with one of the other entities on the sidelines. And you know who those entities are. It's MK, it's the Economic Freedom Fighters. So let's talk about the Saturday event in a little bit more detail. There was conversation about the venue, right? The venue was the Khayelitsha Mandela Park Stadium, and it's a small stadium. It's a 2,000-seater. So what the ANC did strategically, they got these two big tents. You know, they put people under the tents, they put people between the tents, and then the president was speaking facing that way. And what that did is that it made the venue look bigger, made the venue fuller, right? And they were saying that maybe 20,000 people showed up, and that would still be a respectable crowd. We have to be honest about that, but it's not a mega crowd. It's not the crowds that we saw at the MK event. It's not the crowds that we saw at Gayton Mackenzie's Athlone Stadium event in the Western Cape. These are not the crowds we've seen at the EFF events even. So to have an event with about 20,000 or so people, or maybe even between 10,000 and 20,000, respectable. The optics, the way that they fixed it, looked great. But the number of people in that particular venue was not that much. You know, the mayor of Cape Town said that they wanted a bigger venue. They couldn't book on time. He said that they wanted Athlone Stadium. They didn't book on time. They were calling him, etc., etc. He couldn't help them because they were disorganized. And that was part of the discourse. Tony Yengeni, as we saw, was being insulted by Fikile Mbalula for asking about the size of the venue. The ANC made good use of the venue. Their event was well organized, well orchestrated, well covered by the media, but the turnout was very low, or comparatively low, not very low, comparatively low. Let me use the correct words. The online following of the event was moderate. If you look at YouTube, SABC covered the event. They had about 25,000 viewers by the time I was recording this. But comparing the SABC coverage of the EFF event, the MK event, both of those events had more viewers, 45,000, 55,000 in comparison to the 25,000 that the ANC event is sitting on. Even on social media, I think the event trended at some point at about two, and because there were different hashtags, it was second and it was also, I think, seventh. But the number of people retweeting about it was relatively low. It wasn't one of those 1 million people speaking about this first on the trending list. It was about 8,000 people are tweeting about this, 3,000 people are tweeting about this, showing that even on social media, the appetite to follow the event was relatively subdued. And we have to be honest about that. There was also some discussion about the Golf Day and the Gala Dinner event that preceded the actual stadium event and the costs of sitting next to the president and all of that fundraising discussion. So, according to the reporting, the ANC raised 50 million from the events. They raised 20 million from the Golf Day and 30 million from the Gala Dinner. So apparently, according to Sunday Times, people paid 5 million rands to sit at the president's table. There's nothing wrong with the ANC fundraising. All political parties have to fundraise. But there are some legitimate concerns about what the people who pay these monies hope to get in return. You know, business people use proximity and access to get preferential laws, preferential contracts. Every tenderpreneur plays the game, and part of the game is sitting next to the most powerful people, right? So I think what needs to be done at events like this is that the guest list should be published, and especially the guest list of those who sit next to ministers and the president. If state capture is the concern, then those issues must be considered. If you think about United Manganese, one of the big donors to the ANC in the last 3 years, they have benefited from proximity to the ANC, from BEE deals and all of that. If you look at Patrice Motsepe, for example, he's a big donor to the ANC, and his African Rainbow Energy and Power Company has benefited from the Renewable Energy Independent Power Producer Program and government funding for those projects. So he's somebody who has gotten a lot of bang for buck from being close to politicians. Now let's discuss some highlights of President Ramaphosa's remarks. The first clip that I want to look at is where he spoke about anti-transformation, state capture forces through breakaway parties and all of that. So this is what he had to say.
Without unity, our revolution will be defeated also by counter-revolution. In last year's January 8th statement, we drew attention to the fact that there is a common cause between anti-transformation forces and the state capture forces to destroy the African National Congress from within and also to dislodge the ANC from power. Part of the counter-revolutionary tactic is to promote breakaway parties to erode the support base of the ANC. Abaninzi benu niyazi ke ukuthi amanye amaqembu azisusa apha ku-ANC. They broke away. They formed their own splinter parties, hoping that they will weaken and destroy the ANC. Bebonke noxa bephumile apha ku-ANC, they remain small and weak. I-African National Congress iyaqhuba, iyaqina, iqhubela phambili. They try to weaken the ANC by having all these splinter organizations. You know, xa ungajonga kakuhle, many of those other parties ezingaseceleni ku-ANC, many of them zisuka apha ku-ANC. Basuka apha ngoba bengathandi into ezithize ze-ANC. Bangathandi ezinye inkokheli ze-ANC. Xa bephuma apha, they think they will weaken the ANC. So bayihlule i-ANC. They will never defeat the African National Congress. Some of these parties masquerade as more radical than the ANC, but their revolutionary sounding rhetoric cannot hide the reality that they have common cause with the forces opposing transformation. The shared goal of all these forces is to deprive the ANC of the ability to use state power to effect change. To pursue the NDR effectively, the democratic movement needs to have a decisive influence over the state and a clear mandate to govern in pursuit of fundamental change. Without state power, the NDR will not succeed. And one organization only can have state power, and that is the African National Congress. Abanye aba bayaphupha nje. Uma bethi bafuna state power, state power will always be in the hands of the African National Congress.
It's true that the ANC is still the biggest lion in the jungle, but it's a wounded lion. It's a limping lion in the jungle. And while it's roaring, I don't think that it has necessarily the same dominance as it used to have. And of course, it's true that the ANC is still governing, but it's not really true that the ANC splinters are small and weak. 1.5 million votes for the EFF is not small. It's not weak. That's a significant organization with headquarters in Gandhi Square, with a significant following on social media, with significant and recognizable leaders, with lots of seats in parliament. Actually, it's a party that is bigger than the Democratic Alliance was at some point in the year 2000, a party that is now on 20%. So in terms of trajectory of the duration of time that it takes to get to a particular level. If you look at where the DA was in 2014, they had to keep growing to that 20%. But they were a sizable party. Once you are at over 5%, you are not small by any stretch of the imagination. The EFF is significantly bigger than the IFP has been for a while, right? So that's not small, that's not weak. If you look at the MK party, 2.3 million votes, that's not small. That's 14.3% of the electorate who voted, who are supporting that party. That's 45% of support in KwaZulu-Natal. That's a party that took you from 54% to 17%, right? That's a 37% drop of the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal. These splinter parties are not weak. They're not small. They may have some growing pains, they may have some drama, but all political parties have drama. All political parties have a bit of controversy. But the idea that they are small and weak, I don't think that is true. Of course, if you are the leader of the African National Congress, you have to say that. You have to project confidence, but facts are stubborn things, as they say, and I don't think the numbers indicate that these are small parties. I think that it's true that the ANC is weakened by the splinters. He said the ANC is not weakened by the splinters, but it's true that it has been weakened. If you think about 2009, the ANC could have done better, but they lost 1.3 million votes to COPE. If you look at 2014, the ANC lost 1.1 million votes to EFF. 2019, they lost 1.9 million votes to the EFF. 2024, 1.53 million votes to the EFF and 2.34 million votes to the MK party. That's a total of 3.9 million votes. You add the EFF votes, you add the MK votes together with the ANC. The ANC is back in the 60s, comfortably back in the 60s, where they used to be most of the early 2000s. So the idea that the ANC has not been weakened by the splinters is not true. And the splinters are no longer falling for what was done to COPE. Remember, COPE came out strong. It was a strong entry into the political fray. One of the problems that COPE had is that they always had two leaders, even from the beginning, and it was not clear who's who in the zoo. You had Musua Likota and then you had Mbazi Mashilowa, and those two were clashing like this. They didn't have a meeting of the minds. They were not ad idem, as they say. So that was already a fabric for disaster. Then the party was infiltrated by many ANC operatives who came in there to basically unravel that operation, and they successfully did so. That's why you see a lot of new political parties now are not rushing to constitute, rushing to Congress, conference, elect leadership, etc. Because you can be infiltrated, big money can buy players in your party, and those players can pull you down. You don't have to be imaginative about this. It's not conspiracy theory stuff. It's what happened to COPE. That's why you see EFF is so controlling about its leadership, MK so controlling about this leadership. These are people who were within the ANC at a particular point, saw what was done to COPE and no longer want to create avenues or pathways for that to be done to them. So a little bit on the anti-democratic side, but what they do and why they do that is to make sure that they're not infiltrated. So the ANC has been weakened by the splinters. The splinters are no longer the types of splinters that you saw with COPE. The claim that the ANC is radical and working for transformation, this narrative is not necessarily true or credible, because the Ramaphosa ANC is pursuing a strategy in terms of their financial approach of austerity and privatization. Operation Vulundlela is Operation Daisa Lentole, which is privatization strategy. You look at austerity, that's not National Democratic Revolution type of strategy. That is a neoliberal economic strategy that will then lead to more concentration of wealth in the hands of a few, not necessarily liberalization or more inclusion. South Africa is an extractive economy. I often speak about what the book Why Nations Fail speaks about by Darren Asimoglu and James Robinson. And it shows how you need to have structural change. You need to have more competition, more inclusion in order to transform the economy. But that is not the billionaire approach. That is not the neoliberal approach. There's a mismatch between the bold rhetoric that President Ramaphosa was speaking about, even his anti-colonial rhetoric at the beginning of his speech. There's a mismatch between the bold rhetoric, right, of the National Democratic Revolution, the Freedom Charter, versus what people are experiencing and what people are witnessing on the ground. When it comes to the discussions of concentration of wealth, Look at Johan Rupert's group of companies. They have expanded control of network infrastructure, right? The energy exchange of Southern Africa is owned by Johan Rupert now, right? You look at the fiber internet space. He basically controls all of fiber internet in South Africa, Dark Fiber Africa, Vumatel, all of these companies. They're his companies, right? So he is controlling access to internet. He's going to control the sale of electricity from independent power producers. Look at Patrice Motsepe, who's won a significant number of IPP contracts since the Ramaphosa administration came into effect. 50% of operational IPP contracts have gone to him, right? And the ICAMVA consortium that African Rainbow Energy and Power is a part of. You look at the concentration of the banking sector, right? The banking sector is concentrated in 5 banks' hands, right? A lot of these banks trace back to Stellenbosch, whether it's Capitec, FNB, ABSA. These are Stellenbosch-backed or historically Stellenbosch banks, or they come from that economy. You look at PEP, you look at ShopRite, Stellenbosch entities. The idea that there is a national democratic revolution happening under President Ramaphosa, I don't think is economically true, and I don't think is one that is validated by the data. Even if you look at Bella Act just changes inclusion in terms of what happens at private schools, but it doesn't actually change the quality of education in township schools, rural schools. Right now, there's nothing much that is happening in that respect. The NHI is something that is a more inclusive idea, but whether or not that will really be implemented, I'm not particularly sure, because there's going to be pushback to the NHI. The president himself spoke a lot about privatization and private sector partnerships. The state capacity that he was speaking about is not strong because the public sector is often sidelined by the administration in favor of consulting companies, right? The biggest weakness of government model of doing things right now is the tender system, right? You have got all of these unqualified company comrades opening companies, and then they win contracts, but they deliver fresh air. You combine that with the fact that the private sector is given, space to run amok. You're not going to have the kind of state capacity that the president is envisioning or talking about. So let's talk about this second clip, where President Ramaphosa spoke about electoral losses and the reasons why the party lost. Let's listen to what he had to say.
The outcome of the May 2024 elections has been characterized by the National Executive Committee of the ANC as a strategic setback for the ANC-led National Democratic Revolution and the Congress movement as a whole. For any liberation movement or any progressive party, losing a majority in government is a strategic setback. We have to be honest that the outcome of the May elections was a really sad moment for the African National Congress. It was a huge setback for the ANC. Without an effective response, such a setback can halt or derail the progress of socio-economic transformation. The reasons for our electoral decline include the state of the economy. It also includes the crisis of unemployment and social reproduction. The reasons for our decline also include poor basic services and deficiencies of capable, ethical, and responsive governance, as well as the ANC's organizational weakness and our damaged brand. A combination of some of these reasons led to many of our traditional supporters, as well as voters, staying away from the elections or voting for other parties. We accept this, and the extent and depth of the electoral loss points to an organization that has lost significant support and public confidence. This may be a painful reality for us to accept, but our healing lies in accepting the depth of dysfunction in our structures and amongst our members and leadership. One of the reasons we lost is because our branches have become weak. Our branches are no longer functioning in the way they used to.
Some thoughts about the president's remarks. He's right that branches were part of the problem. If the ANC can improve their branches, they may be able to grow. But they also have to be honest about why they don't have community leadership, good community leadership in communities where you can create strong branches. To have a strong branch, you need to have good branch leaders. And a lot of people don't want to join the ANC and lead those branches because communities no longer trust or want to be associated with the ANC. The people who want to really lead these projects in the ANC oftentimes are the ones who are looking for ways to exploit municipal contracts and that kind of thing. The good people within the municipalities are being pushed out of the party, intimidated. Sometimes they get killed. And it's really quite a mess. You have to deal with a lot of issues. In communities, people are dealing with land dumps that are not cleared, potholes, water issues right now. They're dealing with issues that there's still load reduction in many townships, many areas of South Africa. So load shedding is only over in the CBD, not necessarily the CBD, the business districts of South Africa, but also it's over in the suburbs of South Africa. But in the townships, they're still experiencing a lot of load reduction up until this point. In the communities, they are dealing with gangs that are doing as they please. They come in and out of certain neighborhoods and do as this. You look at Cape Flats, you look at El Dorado, you look at Westbury, to name a few. People are doing what they want. The same applies to neighborhoods such as Sunnyside, where the drug dealers, the human traffickers just do as they please. All of these things are things which make people frustrated with the quality of local government in and of itself. And if you now have to go and wear that jersey in the community to say, this is my party, this is my entity, vote, and let's organize, sometimes it becomes difficult. So to fix branches, the ANC will have to be more honest about themselves. And there's the issue of the lack of ethical leadership and the extent of corruption that is happening within those particular municipalities and local governments that the ANC will have to deal with. It's one thing to say, let's fix branches. But if you don't deal with the fact that there are so many, remember that guy who came out there and was joking about why are people asking him about sewage whilst he's on water, whilst he's on holiday. Why am I saying whilst he's on water? Whilst he's on holiday. And then he had to come back and apologize. It just shows that sometimes, the issue of ethical leadership and corruption-free leadership is one that the ANC is going to have to address. The elephant in the room that the president didn't address in his conversation around why the party failed is what they have done to create those splinters. And I think if he had had a conversation about that, maybe he would have even touched a really delicate nerve and maybe even shifted the discourse or made that particular speech more interesting. The ANC was so quick to get rid of Julius Malema. About Derek Kanekom and all of these guys were involved in that, if you remember. And these are people who are Ramaphosa guys. And then Zuma was treated in a particular way. When Ramaphosa came in, they started talking about 9 wasted years, etc., etc. Then there was all of the drama that unfolded. And then, the treatment of Jacob Zuma was such that they forced him into a corner. Whether you will agree with him or not, whether you like him or not, let's look at it now from a political strategy perspective. If you know that you have a leader who's very popular in certain parts of the country, very popular with certain demographics, certain people from different classes, maybe people who live in townships, rural areas, they love him. They love his humility. They feel that they did very well under him. If you know that and you're coming in to lead after him, you have to make sure that that person is protected from certain scrutiny, certain consequences. Let's not pretend here for a second that we are living in a system where the law is blind and Lady Justice is blind, etc., etc. Because Lady Justice can see what Pulemabe is doing and charge him, but she can't see what is happening in Palapala, right? That's Lady Justice for you. Lady Justice could not see what de Klerk did, right? So the idea that Lady Justice is fair, neutral, etc., we've seen it countless times. Some premiers can be accused of forging their academic records. Nothing will happen to them, right? They will continue to be members of a party and participating. Others will have to step aside. The whole thing is shenanigans. If you think about, for instance, what we found out right now about Thembisi Melani Nkadimeng, who was implicated in getting monies from VBS, living beyond her means, etc. Lady Justice is just waking up and stretching and wiping her eyes. She's not like moving on that particular issue. So point I'm trying to make is that if you are in power and you want particular individuals to be protected, you will make sure that those individuals don't face particular consequences. This idea that there's all been renewal and all of that is not held up when we've seen scandals such as Royal Baca. We've seen scandals such as which hospital was it in Gauteng again, which had those massive corruption scandals where even we saw Babita Decoran being killed. We saw Digital Vibes. All of these scandals happened under Renewal. We saw face masks being overcharged for. We saw schools being fumigated for 400 million by unqualified people who had just registered companies just at the beginning of the pandemic. All of these things happened under New Dawn. Slay Queens are still thriving under New Dawn. You know, if you go to all of the nightclubs all around Johannesburg, the Slay Queens can tell you all of the cadres. We've seen the videos of politicians dancing with Slay Queens into the still of the night or into the whatever twilight. What is it? What dancing into the night with a Slay Queen? We've seen it. Edwin Sodi is not struggling in this economy either, right? And he's still working with people within the political framework. I could go on and on. So the New Dawn idea is one that is not necessarily fully credible, if I'm being honest, right? Because of everything that we've seen. Let's talk about the last clip here that I'm going to discuss. President Ramaphosa spoke about the GNU as a strategic move to regain momentum. This is what he had to say about the GNU and the DA coalition.
10 parties agreed to join the ANC-led government of national unity based on the statement of intent. Through the statement of intent, the parties have made a firm commitment to respect the Constitution of our country, to promote the rule of law, and to promote accountability, transparency, integrity, and good governance. The formation of the GNU is a tactical decision to pursue the national democratic revolution under new conditions that were occasioned by the electoral setback. The ANC's strategic objective has not changed, but we pursue this objective under conditions we no longer have a majority. When we no longer have a majority to form a government on our own, but in cooperation with other parties. As the ANC, we are determined to regain public confidence and return as a majority party in the next elections. Uma siya kulolu khetho olulandelayo, sizabuya si-majority party. Bayathanda noma bathande, i-ANC izawubuya iphethe yodwa. In the meantime, comrades, we will work with other political parties, even those with whom we have fundamental differences, to secure space for addressing the needs of our people as articulated in our 2024 election manifesto. Now, the false notion that the character of the ANC and strategy of the ANC has now been redefined by a single tactic of forming a broad, inclusive government of national unity is really a distortion of the realities our movement faced and should be dismissed out of hand. Bacinga ukuthi sesishintshile. We are no longer the ANC of old. We remain the African National Congress with our principles, being very clear on what we stand for. Similarly, the idea that a progressive party cannot engage its opponents in short-term tactical agreements without selling out is a lie and is ahistorical. Our own experience, as well as the experiences of many revolutionary movements, show that there are moments where conditions require that you work with your opponents to secure space for the revolution to regain momentum. And that is precisely what we have done. The movement, therefore, has to ensure that the tactical initiative which we gained through the formation of the ANC-led government of national unity is being used effectively to open space and to advance to the benefit of the motive forces and all South Africans. In the end, the ANC remains committed to forge national consensus on fundamental issues that affect our diverse nation. While being flexible on tactics, comrades, we maintain firmness of principle. Our determination to implement transformative laws and policies adopted by the parliament of our country, such as the Basic Education Law Amendment, the BELA Act, the National Health Insurance, the NHI, and other important pieces of legislation will continue without any reversal and without any doubt. That is how the ANC will continue.
So here are my thoughts about this. The big challenge is that the DA is also using the GNU to regain steam and to go head to head with particular parts of the ANC, for instance, the Mashatile faction of the ANC. They're also playing a game of tactics here, and they also want to grow, and they still view the ANC as their enemy. So while it's true that, yeah, this was a strategic thing, a tactical move we had to make, many people within the ANC are justified to be concerned because you're doing a tactical thing with your enemy. You're doing a tactical thing with a person who has outlined that they disagree with your policies, ideologies, your deployment of personnel, everything that you stand for, they resent and they disagree with, right? So the DA is also trying to play the game of divide and rule or divide and grow with the ANC. The DA is opposed to cadre deployment, which is a key part of the NDR. The DA is opposed to the NHI, which is the next big legislative agenda of the ANC. They lost on the Bella Act, but they're going to fight hard and fight to the bitter end on this NHI issue because it affects so many of their constituents and they don't believe in it and they think that it will ruin the healthcare system in South Africa. I don't think all of their arguments are out of this world in that respect. I do think that there are serious questions about the NHI. All I'm trying to put across is that, it will not be easy to continue with this particular tactical strategy without there being costs to the ANC, particularly if the DA ministers are being viewed as being effective while the ANC ministers are not. The ANC may suffer from this tactical plan. It may not be a tactical plan that takes them to 50%. The president spoke about firmness of principle, but that sounds a little bit like Kamala Harris saying her values have not changed while she was supporting different things at different times and being challenged on it. The president also spoke about the ANC focus on electricity supply, fixing municipal waste and management, fixing water supply, fixing the issues of undocumented immigration and undocumented workers, the spaza shop closures and registrations, safe food. He spoke about the national dialogue. He spoke about international solidarity, human rights, and Pan-Africanism. But there was no robust discussion on Mozambique, which is having an inauguration on the 15th potentially, where the opposition leader has called for protests. No robust discussion on the DRC, where there's a conflict for resources and there are conflicts with rebel groups between the government of the DRC, Rwanda, M23, major conflict in Central Africa. No robust discussion on Sudan. No, these lack of robust discussions in these areas are juxtaposed with the fact that the ANC takes a very strong and clear position on the people of Western Sahara, on Palestine. It's a very strong and clear position on Cuba, but no position on Zimbabwe, no position on Mozambique, no strong position on DRC. It almost feels as if the ANC is neglecting the issues that affect predominantly black people to focus on the issues that affect Europeans, to focus on the issues that affect North Africa and the Middle East, but not necessarily the issues affecting black bodies within the SADC region, right? He also spoke about a liberation movement summit, and that's something that calls into question whether or not the ANC appreciates that some of the problems that the president spoke about earlier around, illegal immigration, around undocumented people taking certain jobs, that he doesn't realize is because of the ANC being supportive of political parties such as Frelimo and ZANU-PF. A lot of work is going to have to be done, right, to make the local government promises worthwhile and easy to achieve. A lot of work is going to have to be done. The party will really need to pull up their socks and turn things around in 2025, because we've seen that local government has a lot of challenges. Only 20% of municipalities had clean audits out of 257 municipalities, most of those were ANC municipalities. You would have to have high volumes of arrests of people who work in municipalities to clean up those municipalities. I mean, the estimated expenditure for municipalities in 2025 is about 520 billion. So this is not a small amount of money. And to clean it up and to be able to have a turnaround by 2026, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult. Now let's go back to the NDR. The president spoke about it. President outlined that the ANC is committed to this, why they want state power, why they're going to retain state power. The plan, the NDR, tries to realize the aims of the Freedom Charter. If you remember the key principles of the Freedom Charter, equality and democracy, land and liberty, it emphasizes that people who have been deprived of their birthright to land, liberty, and peace due to an unjust government need to get that land back. I don't think that the ANC is going to go and look at land reform at this particular point. Economic rights. The charter calls for the redistribution of land, nationalization of key industries, and equal economic opportunities for all. To have equal economic opportunities for all, you have to restructure the hyper-concentrated economy where only 5 banks control everything, 4 supermarkets control everything, certain number of construction companies control everything. The president and his Reserve Bank governor and his finance minister have shown that they don't have an appetite for any of these things. Education and movement. The Freedom Charter advocated for the corridors of learning to be open for all. But right now, we've seen budget cuts to basic education. We've seen Western Cape complaining that their budget cut, they cannot pay teachers this year. These things don't indicate that there's a commitment to the NDR in its truest sense. That's the challenge, is that the Ramaphosa administration is pro-privatization and pro-austerity. Budgets have been cut, left, right, and center. They're not pro any of the things that the NDR speaks about. Now, from the ANC perspective, then the question then becomes, if we have a leader who's a billionaire, who speaks this radical discourse at key moments, but does not ideologically believe in it himself, will we be able to bounce back to 50 and 60? That's the question. What do you guys think, though? Do you think that a billionaire can implement the kind of ideas that have been expressed in the National Democratic Revolution and get the ANC back to 50%, 60%? Do you think that the ANC will continue to fall to lower and lower percentages? Let's have a conversation. Till the next one.